Mindshift, a PLCS Empowerment Collective podcast. I am one of your hosts. My name is Christopher Villarreal.
And hello, my name is Deb Anderson. I'm glad to be here today.
And we are talking today about academics and academic support. And, you know, Deb, I was a high school ELA teacher for a number of years, and I did some work in curriculum after that. And so this is a topic that I have a lot of strong feelings about. One of the things that I think is a little bit of a hot take with academics is, I'm just going to say it, I hate grades. I hate them.
Really?
Yes, I think they are a little bit of a subjective metric for success that really doesn't tell the whole story about a student and a student's experience. And we rely so heavily on grades and what that means for our students' performances in school and ultimately in life. And so that's my hot take.
Okay, but Christopher, I want to give you a counter to that because I was a really good student. I mean, the one area of my life that I felt like I did well was school. And one of the ways I knew that was grades. So if I didn't have grades, I don't know that I would have felt like I was performing at the level that I would have wanted to perform at.
You're feeding right into my point, because I also was excellent at school, but that doesn't mean I learned anything. So we're going to talk a little bit about academics, academic support today with our very special guest, PLCS's very own Gretchen Kalkowski. Gretchen, please introduce yourself.
Yes. I'm Gretchen Kalkowski. I have been in education for 36 years. I started out as a kindergarten teacher, which I loved, and I did that for 26 years. And then I became an instructional coach, so I worked with teachers in a building. I absolutely love that. And now my job is professional development. But alongside that is I'm a parent of two, where it's probably where I learned the most about how to support kids with academics.
Christopher has an interesting shift on this. And I'm really curious about how you view academics, and because saying we need to shift from viewing it as a race to instead viewing it as a journey of discovery.
Yes. You know what? In my kindergarten classroom, I had a poster that said childhood is a journey, not a race. And so I lived by it. But one thing that Christopher had said about grades is I completely agree. Sometimes kids are just doing the work to get a grade, not to learn it. And they don't take ownership of their own learning. And as adults in their lives, we need to help them take ownership in learning the content, not just getting a grade.
And how do we do that?
Well, I think it starts young. I think you have to start them young. And I think one big thing that I learned it as a parent, I learned it being a teacher, is we have to expect kids' best to be their best, not to be the best. And I think as parents, it's very easy to get caught up in comparing your child to other people and then to pushing them to be the very best. And when really they're never going to be the best. The chances of them being the best at anything in their whole life is going to be slim. So if we can teach them to be their best, I think that they'll take more ownership in learning what they need to learn to be successful.
If you can see me right now, I look like a bobblehead because I'm over here very enthusiastically nodding my head in agreement with everything that Gretchen is saying. And, you know, I work for an educational institution, so I have to backpedal just a hair because I will say that here in PLCS, we've made a lot of progress in working to have grades and a grading system that really does reflect what our students know and are able to do, and not just how good they are at school. So I'm talking more about the traditional way of grading back in the day, right? Not necessarily how we grade now, making more of those shifts towards standards-based grading and some of those things that we're seeing happening today. And so with that, there is still that fear of failure for students, right? Especially when you have the high achievers like Deb and myself were when we were in school, that we don't want to fail. We only want to do our best, which is coincidentally getting the highest grade available to us. But that doesn't always happen. And so thinking about parents and how they can have some of these conversations about grades and performance with their students, how can our parents help their students build resilience in a scenario where they're, like you said, where they're not the best, where yes, they're doing their best, but maybe their best isn't an A? How can parents help students in those kinds of situations?
Well, it started when having high expectations of my kids when they were young, like kindergarten. You know what? Here's your schedule for the week. You have PE on this day. You have library on this day. And we had a chart on our fridge. And I did this when I taught kindergarten. I gave it to parents sometimes if they were struggling. And her backpack was her responsibility. And so when she knew she had library, she had to get her library book and put it in her backpack. And if she didn't, guess what? I didn't go home and get it and bring it to her. I was like, I guess you don't get a library book this week. And it's a lot easier to parent kids. And it's the hardest thing is to see your kid disappointed. But one of the best things when they're young is to experience disappointment, because it's always going to be there.
One of the things that we've been having conversations about in our district and in the Empowerment Collective is how our families can better support their students academically at home. And one of the roadblocks that I've heard to that from parents is that they think that means we're asking them to be teachers at home. And I think a little bit of that is trauma from the pandemic, where in some cases parents did have to be teachers at home. But when we say support your students at home academically, we're not asking you to teach your kids at home. We're asking you to promote a love of learning and of exploration outside of just academic subjects. Can you help our listeners know how they can do that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of resources out there that when I was a parent, I didn't even know, but that have just been, I think I've just learned about them. But any of the public libraries, I think the first thing as parents, I think when they're young, read to them. Don't give them flashcards. Don't give them, Christopher, we just had this. I just gave Christopher a TED talk on this about his son. And I was saying, the best thing you can do is put your kid on your lap. Put your phone away for an hour. Take the time, give it to your kid, and listen to him.
I want to interject real quick because, yes, you gave me this your TED talk and you stepped off your soapbox and I've processed it and you're 100% correct. And I love that advice. It goes well beyond just 4-year-olds. When they're too big to sit on your lap, you can still sit at the table with them.
Yes.
You can still sit on the couch next to them and engage with them in that meaningful way.
I'm the mental health person. And so as I listen to you, I can't help but think that even though we're talking about ways we can support our kids academically, you're also talking about how to support their mental health. I mean, reading to your kid, having your kids sit with you, spending time with them without your phone, all of those things. We're really hitting two birds with one stone. What I'm wondering about, Gretchen, I have grandkids. The middle one is a senior in high school. The youngest one is a freshman in high school. And when I think about some of the times I hear them say, why do I have to take fill in the blank, calculus? I'm never going to use it. So why do I have to do this dumb class? I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do the work. How do we help instill a love of learning in our kids so that they want to learn for the learning's sake?
Again, I hate to say this. I don't think it's like once they're in high school, it's too late. But I think having conversations with them, and what is it about it that you don't like? Sometimes when you're an adult in a job, there are things you don't want to do and you don't like. But guess what? You don't get to say, I'm not doing this. So sometimes we have to do things we don't want and things that are hard for us.
So both of you are educators. If I had a child who was really struggling in a class, is it appropriate as a parent to call the teacher and say, my child is really struggling, what can I do to help? Or to say, I don't know how to help them with math. Is there something that I can do to help them? What would you advise a parent who maybe doesn't know what to do when their kid's struggling?
When I was in the classroom, Deb, I love those phone calls and emails because the key there is you said, what can I do to help them? The challenging ones are when the parent calls or emails and says, my student is struggling in your class. What are you going to do to help them? And it's not that I don't want to help their student. I'm doing everything that I can, that I have the capacity to do in the time I have with their student to help their student. But it's that partnership between parent and teacher that will have the biggest chance at moving the needle for that student. So if the parent calls and says, how can I help my student with this area that they're struggling in? That's going to move us forward.
Yes.
Okay.
You know what? I agree with that. And I think the thing that sometimes both teachers and parents forget is they all want the same thing. They want to see their student grow and become better and learn.
And I want to talk about the student for a second, because, we've talked about the teacher, we've talked about the parent, we haven't really talked about the student. And going back to my personal experience in the classroom, I taught reading intervention for 9th grade students. So by the time they get to high school, they're not reading at grade level. And in many cases, if you're in reading intervention, you're reading 3, 4, 5 grade levels below where you should be. And for those students, they have developed what's called a fixed mindset, where they walk into my classroom and they say, yeah, Mr. V, I'm here because I can't read. That's not uncommon. Our students, our kids internalize what they hear. And so for me, those kids have heard for the last 3, 4, 5 years, you can't read, you can't read, you can't read, you're not a good reader. So they internalize that language and they hear that, and that starts to shape their identity and it becomes fixed in their mind. Tell me how we can help students change that.
Okay, Deb has heard me talk about this a lot. But again, I think it is trying to get them to have a growth mindset. Then it becomes, we're going back to this grading when I talked about they're not working for a grade, they're working to learn the content. Because I think when you get to 9th grade and you're already 3 or 4 grade levels behind, that seems like a very daunting task. How's that going to happen? But I think if you can chunk things for kids and make it a progression, I think that is a great way to help them.
I really think that concept that you guys are talking about of a growth mindset really does tie together a lot of what we've been talking about and discussing today, because, we talked about shifting academics from being that race to the finish line to being more of a journey. And my kid's learning basketball right now. Okay. 4-year-old basketball is a hoot if you haven't seen it. And I watch that and I'm like, what in the world is happening right now? But I have to get that in my own mind, right? Like, it's about growth. It's about progress. It's about learning those little things along the way that are going to get you to that end result. So I think you can take that concept and apply it to a lot of different things. And we're going to wrap up here because we're running out of time. So any parting thoughts, parting words you want to share with our listeners, Gretchen?
I would just say, whether you're a teacher or you're a parent, just continue to say you want the student to be their best, not the best. So push kids to be their best. They don't have to be the best.
I love that, Gretchen. Thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time.